Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Our Story Conversations with PhilDev. Our Story is a 10-minute weekly web series that brings you today's most promising global Filipinos in the field of entrepreneurship and innovation. Get up close and personal with distinguished Filipino entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders through inspiring stories of their journey towards success. So, the show gives us a sneak peek to the lives of these Filipinos, leading change in the hopes of inspiring others in their journey and they're also aspiring innovators and entrepreneurs who are making a difference in their field. So this is their story, our story. Our guest today is Mr. Jones Castro. Jones is an independent director of BDO. He has 39 years of banking expertise with 32 years of international banking experience. He served as area head for South and Southeast Asia of Wells Fargo Bank in San Francisco from 2009 to 2011. And from 2006 to 2009, he was the regional head for Latin America and the Caribbean of Wachovia Bank in Miami and managed 25 countries, three of which are in overseas offices, 30 team members, and over $1.8 billion in loans. Jones is also a member of the PhilDev Board of Trustees and served as PhilDev US Executive Vice Chairman. How are you, Jones? Good morning.
Good morning or good afternoon from here.
How have you been doing?
All right, and I hope everyone else who's listening in is keeping well and safe.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm sure they are tuned into this interview. Jones, I think our discussion right now is very timely because a lot of the startups right now are, barely getting by, staying afloat, if you may say so. Jones, let's just start first of getting to know about you. So, given your years of experience in the area of banking and finance, what is it that you love most about the work that you do?
Well, as you mentioned, I would say about 75-80% of my time was really international. So to me, I love being exposed to different cultures. That means also I'm a foodie, so that means different types of cuisines and also languages. And every time I meet someone, I try to find out where they're from, either from the Philippines, which province they're from, or region they're from, and overseas, which countries they're from. But at the same time, working with various clients, and more importantly, where there's a crisis, because every crisis there's an opportunity. And with that opportunity, you get to find a solution, craft a solution, create a solution for your client, which may not necessarily be the normal product or the normal solution.
So, Jones, you've been in the banking industry for close to 40 years, right? And you've seen a lot of recession, financial hardships. But specifically, how has the COVID-19 pandemic created an impact on the financing landscape?
Well, I think what the first impact was on the economy is that you have a complete shutdown, or just about a complete shutdown of demand, because everyone had to stay at home and you had a lockdown. So you had the companies, they could be small companies or large companies. Large companies like airlines, all of a sudden there are no passengers on the plane, right? Or small businesses like restaurants. Because of the lockdown, the most they can do is take home or takeouts. And if the source of revenue for that restaurant has been takeouts, and that's fine. But majority people, like the Filipinos, would like to stay in, chat, which no longer exists. So all of a sudden, your revenue flow stops. But in the meantime, your expenses continue. You have your employees. The only way to cut that short too is to let go of your employees. But that's rather difficult. Here in the US, they've given PPP to allow small businesses to keep their employees up to a certain period, right? So you have that impact on the companies. And this is where that saying goes, which is cash is king. So any company, any small business that has cash would be able to survive more. And I don't know if it's synonymous, but small businesses don't necessarily have as much cash or access to cash or to liquidity as the larger companies. So the impact on the startups, the impact on small businesses is dramatic as far as cash is concerned. And without the cash, it's very hard to continue operations.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's true, Jones. Both big and small companies are really getting affected by this. So, Jones, you started talking about the impact of the pandemic to to the MSMEs and startups, right? A few weeks ago, we spoke with Eric Manlunas, who's an investor who had portfolio in the US and in Southeast Asia. And one of the things that he said is that during this pandemic, the focus would be internally. I mean, forget about scaling up, just survival. Is it also something that you're also looking at as far as banking and financing access from startups to
Very,
banks?
very true. First of
Mm-hmm.
all, the banks are essentially, other than the Banco Central, no, other than
Mm-hmm.
the BSP, your lender of last resort before you go to the BSP is really the bank. So at that point, the bank has to maintain its liquidity. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, with the Bayanihan law, all of a sudden, uh, borrowers aren't paying the banks. So the banks have to maintain that liquidity for future borrowers, uh, or borrowers which are good, which are solvent, but have liquidity issues during this pandemic that they have to keep afloat. And also for depositors, because you have two types of depositors, right? Those who would like to maintain liquidity for a more rainy day. It's already a rainy day, but for a more rainy day, while those who really have to withdraw to be able to survive. And for those who have to withdraw, the bank has to maintain its liquidity. And the last thing a bank does not want to have is not have liquidity, because that becomes a precursor for a potential run, because people will say, I tried to withdraw and I couldn't withdraw. So all institutions have to maintain their liquidity, and banks more so.
Mm-hmm. So Jones, how do you think, given your experience mentoring several startups in the Philippines, how do you think will this affect the MSME or the startups in the Philippines in general?
No, it really depends. I'm mentoring right now one startup called People Pods. I'll plug the People Pods for the time being. But their solution in COVID is really a plus and a minus. Why is that? It's a minus from the point of view. Their People Pods, their solution or their product or their concept is to provide um, living facilities or dormitory style to migrant female workers working in industrial parks. And they're migrant because they don't come from that area. So if you have a park in Laguna, they don't come from Laguna, they come from outside of Laguna, but then they work there, but then they need living facilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of them work and stay in dormitories which are not as safe or secure. So what they are setting up are dormitory facilities. The negative of the COVID is now they have to reconfigure their sleeping quarters to make sure that because they have fourth room, that it's fewer, so as to be able to address the COVID issues, right? But the plus is that now they're in demand, because what's happening is the workers have a hard time, because in different LGUs they have a hard time getting to the factories on time, because they have to go through all the checkpoints. Um, the the workers have to go to the sari-sari store to get their food or whatever. So their facilities have their own sari-sari store, which then they stock up. They ask people what they want, and they buy it all in bulk, and they have a sari-sari store. Their facilities are either within the park or right outside the park, so they don't have to have transportation. They don't have to go through LGU. So now they're in demand. So in a sense, that's positive. So they've been able to work along with COVID parameters, but it also depends on what the product is and if they can pivot. And this is one that they have. We have another one which is Fame. They've been able to come up with a product. But there are others that have difficulty, right? Because their product requires either consumption or concentration of people, which is very difficult also. So I think it really depends. For those that are affected heavily by COVID and don't have the liquidity, one might decide you sort of go into hibernation for a while and then come up again for air. It really depends.
Jones, let's focus on the individuals, the startup founders. At this point, how can businesses or individuals protect themselves financially during this pandemic?
I'll make the assumption that the startup has a loan from a bank, right? So to me, if a startup is having difficulty, let's say with a bank loan, as a banker, I'll put on a banker hat.
Mm-hmm.
Go talk to your banker. Tell your banker what the problem is. and then work with the banker to find the solution. Because what would the banker do? Close your doors? What will they be left with? But if you really approach the banker and tell them, this is my problem, this is how I plan to get out of it, assuming we get out of the pandemic within the next month versus within the next year, this is how I plan to get back up.
Mhm.
And I think the banker will be more than willing, working with a current borrower who's truthful what the issues are and work with it through the issues. And who knows, eventually they become a much, much better uh, customer for the banker, right? So to me, I think if it's a bank, talk to the banker. If it's a credit union, whatever, the same thing. Now, if it's a loan shark, that's a different story altogether.
Thank you, thank you. That's a very good advice, Jones. So, Jones, we've been talking about the current situation, but looking forward, or looking forward, as we move into the new landscape post pandemic, what do you think would be the worst case and best case scenario for the economy? Let's start first with the economy, and next is on a micro level for the startup ecosystem. What's your best and worst case scenario?
Okay. I'll try to answer the Philippine case, right? But I think it's somewhat the same all over, and it's somewhat the same as the U.S. in parts. The Philippine economy is about what, 60 to 70% consumer based,
Mhm.
right? So if everyone is able to go out and go to a pre-COVID scenario wherein everyone's consuming, everyone's going to the malls, everyone's buying, everyone's eating, and that's 60 to 70%, then the faster it will come back, right? Where it would impact um, the larger companies will be the exporters and the importers, right? Because if you export but you don't have a market outside because they haven't recovered, then you really don't have much of an export market. If you import, but then the parts that you need are also not being produced, then you have an issue of supply for the demand that you might have in the Philippines. Uh, with regard to the consumption, it also depends on how comfortable people are. Okay, so just as here in the U.S., and I've been here now for more than 3 months, and I don't know how it is in the Philippines. We've basically been conditioned to stay at home, right? So the moment it's relaxed, everyone decides to go out. But if the cases continue to rise, or you don't know if the numbers are correct, if the cases are correct, um, people aren't comfortable in going to the malls tomorrow. If it's today, it's relaxed. Tomorrow, not everyone goes to the mall, right? They
Mhm.
slowly go back, right? So the return to the 60 to 70% consumption is not going to be overnight either. I think it's going to be slowly developing or evolving to increase. So I think so. The best case really is you go from 0 to 60
Mhm.
overnight. But
Mhm.
I don't think that will be the case. I think it will be slowly. The second is what the role of the government is. And that's where, in the US, you have an advantage, a disadvantage. They've started throwing trillions of dollars to stimulate the economy, to
Mhm.
provide liquidity to the economy, to give money directly to the employees, gives money for them to spend it. And what they noticed is that their bank accounts just started going up because people weren't going out. They were getting their checks, they were just depositing it, would go up until such time they feel comfortable that they'll go out. Okay. The the other thing is what the government does as in terms of liquidity for the banking institutions use the banks to lend. So in the US, the bad thing, as I said, the good thing is they had this stimulus. The bad thing is they're printing it.
Mhm.
The deficit, the budget deficit, which was estimated to be about $1 trillion pre-COVID, is now at about 1.9 trillion. It's almost double. Now, I don't know what it is in the Philippines in terms of how much the government is stimulating the economy. And then the corporations also have a role to stimulate. But at this point in time, it's really difficult because, as I said, it's 60 to 70% uh, personal consumption. Right? So it's just for the corporations, it's really to maintain liquidity and to produce based on the demand. I'm sure the demand is a lot lower than the supply that they can. Worst case, is you have a relapse, right? You have a second wave. Um, Here in the US, the things are starting to spike for two reasons. One is there's relaxation, and one would expect an increase of the cases because people are now outside, right? But then the second thing is, which they expect within the next week or two, is the impact of all these protests. So you basically will have one wave and then a wave right behind it potentially. And if that goes, then people are given a choice, right? Do I shut down again after people have tasted being out? Or do we continue as is and just hopefully it doesn't get worse, right? Arizona already has a big problem. So my guess is what's going to happen here is that we will have the cases, but I think the fact that they've relaxed it, some governors or some states probably won't pull back. They won't put the stay-at-home orders again. But I think individuals will self-discipline themselves. They probably
Mhm.
won't go out again as much, right? Now in the Philippines, my hope is that we don't end up with a second wave. The advantage of the Philippines is it's an archipelago, right? So you can basically contain it within the different cities in different islands, right? And the biggest issue really is NCR, right?
It's true.
In terms of concentration. Right? So if it goes back up again, people might just say, "Well, I won't go back to the mall. I'll probably stay back." So I think that's probably what's going to happen. The only problem there is then again, all of a sudden your demand goes down. Then you're back into an economic downturn, not downturn from but a lull, if you will, instead of a
Mhm.
recovery.
More cautious at this point. So, Jones, what advice can you give small businesses and startups as they recover from the pandemic and prepare for a likely economic downturn?
Okay. If your customers are individuals, let's say, um, what you really have to do first is to make sure that your customers feel comfortable or that they will not be exposed to the virus. First and foremost, you have to do that. But secondly, you have to look at what's your revenue and you have to look at what your expenses are and minimize your expenses to the bare necessities, I think,
Mhm.
uh, not exposing your customers and that the revenue, that basically is really market driven. You have to try to get as many people to utilize your product.
So, Jones, to the viewers, they'd like to know more about you. I mean, they don't have as much opportunity to know you more than we did at PhilDev, and we're very fortunate for that. So, we'd like to ask some rapid fire questions. Okay. So, Jones, what's your favorite pastime?
Favorite pastime? Watching sports, being with my kids. Um, we have this family Viber group. Basically, the way we just, I mean, if somebody goes off for a good 10 minutes, they could come back with about 200 plus messages because of all the puns that we do and go back and forth.
Okay, thank you for that, Jones. So, are you a morning person or a night owl?
Definitely morning.
Morning. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the latest book that you read?
Um, what's the latest? I've had the opportunity to read about 8 books.
Wow.
So and it's rare that I've been able to read them. What's the latest book? Uh, it's a science fiction written by two Chinese authors, and it's a science extraterrestrial terrestrial novel.
Mhm.
So, so it's basically I read fiction and nonfiction. So,
Okay. Okay. All right. So, Jones, what was the best advice you received?
best advice probably is maintain your integrity because the moment people lose trust in you, it's very hard to recover. So my dad always said, it takes a lifetime to build your reputation and a second to lose it.
Very apt advice. And Jones, what will be the advice that you will give your younger self?
Be more adventurous. That's why I became a. That's why I became a banker.
But aren't you adventurous enough? You've been to a lot of countries, right?
Yeah, but that's different. But probably be more adventurous or be more of a risk taker.
Okay, okay. Well, that's good. Jones, at this point, what is your dream?
My dream, first of all, in family, remain healthy and be successful
Mhm,
and be contributing members of society and compassionate.
mhm.
Um, in my case, uh, at this point in time, it really is just to uh, be helpful or be a contributor to society and try to help others. Not necessarily listen to my experiences, but learn from what I did wrong and move on from there.
Well, you've done that to PhilDev. You've been doing it to PhilDev for what? A good 7 years now, 8 years?
8 years for for the Philippines, 10 years for the U.S. So
Well, thank you for that, Jones. Okay, so I'll just go on script and then ask you something, okay?
yeah,
So again, thank you so much, Jones, for that time. If there's any way that people could get in touch with you to get mentoring or to get advice, how can they reach you?
PhilDev,
PhilDev.
PhilDev, PhilDev SNT or PhilDev USA,
Okay,
but it's
okay.
phildev.org, so people can get through that.
Mhm.
We basically have. I really don't know what the website would be, but where you can ask questions and they can be directed to me if people have questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. So, Jones, again,
Thank you.
all right. We hope to have more of you in the coming days or in the coming months. I know a lot of our startups and our viewers would like to know more about, the banking industry because it's one of those institutions that are not necessarily as accessible to most of us. So, to all our viewers, do not forget to leave us a like if you find today's episode interesting. You may also leave us a message in the comment section for topics that we can discuss in the future. Lastly, subscribe and follow us on PhilDev if you want to learn more about innovation entrepreneurship. Our Facebook handle is PhilDev Foundation, facebook.com/Philippine Development, and our Instagram handle and Twitter handle are PhilDev at PhilDev_org. So watch out for our weekly episode. Again, thank you so much. Stay healthy and safe. Bye.